Death comes for all. No one is immune to its caress. Age, disease, misfortune, and war claim the living with no regard for the individual's unfulfilled goals or unachieved dreams. Mortals fear death, but not just for the pain or loss it may entail. They fear it for the unknown. The Raven Queen, goddess of death, fate, and winter. Each is a grim subject, and none have the appeal offered or glory promised by service to other gods. The Raven Queen gives little to her followers, promising no ease from the worry and giving no answers for the looming questions about life or death. Yet, people seek her out. In fact, they go to great lengths to do this. Some feel drawn to her service to find answers to dark questions. Others find respite from the death's imminence or intercession where fate would hold sway, and still others seek comfort in winter's bitter chill. But to understand this goddess that came about in 4th edition, we must first understand her predecessor, for we know a lot about the previous god of death, Nerul. In the early ages of the world, the souls of mortals unclaimed by the gods were not free to pass to the great beyond after death. Instead, Nerul, the god of the dead, his gray, cheerless dominion of Pluton. There they would spend eternity, as powerless shades, haunted by the memories of life's rich sensation and vigor. Nerul's dominion grew ever greater, as each day a myriad of souls came to his realm, never to depart. The god of the dead set his sights on making himself king over all the gods, and began to send blights and plagues into the world to speed the passage of mortals into his realm. But even before this, in the earliest days of creation, when gods still walked the land alongside mortals, Nerul was just a man, a clever and ruthless human wizard who became one of the first non-elves to learn arcane magic from the patron god of all elves, Corellon. His newfound power soon drew him into the war against the Primordials. After one particularly gruesome battle, Nerul looked over the fields filled with corpses and cursed at those who would allow themselves to pass into death, avoiding the duty of preserving creation against annihilation. Retreating back to his study, he spent months brooding over issues of mortality and the threat of the elementals. During this withdrawal, the mage first began his studies of the dead and their uses. He discovered that death need not be the end of a body's usefulness, and magical energy could bestow a semblance of life upon a lifeless corpse. He further determined that such magic could bind the soul to service, either in a body or without one. His learnings became the foundation for necromancy. Nerul, still just a mortal, proudly reached out to Aurum, the current god of the dead. Nerul proudly presented his discoveries, which he believed could constitute a turning point in their current war, the Dawn War. Aurum rejected the findings, claiming that death was a part of the natural cycle that should not be breached. Little did Aurum know how much that rejection would cost him. Nerul sought many other allies in the gods, and they all rejected him. But with Nerul's newfound knowledge, the dead and the undead, he gathered his armies and attacked Aurum, the god of death. Already wounded from the current war, Aurum fell, and Nerul laid claim to the portfolios of death and to the dead, the first time any mortal killed a god. Back to Nerul in the present, we see a similar story unfold. At the height of Nerul's power as the god of the dead, an especially powerful mortal died and found its way into Nerul's domain, a beautiful and proud sorcerer queen. Unique among the gray shades held in Pluton, her ghostly form flowed with her fierce will and ambition. Nerul deemed her a worthy consort, and he gave her form and substance so that she could rule at his side. Her name in life is forgotten. Some knew her as Nira, which is the name that Nerul bestowed upon her, but she proved to be Nerul's doom. For this sorcerer queen, Nira refused to be second to any being, god, or mortal. Nira discovered the means by which Nerul held mortal shades in thrall and seized that power for herself. Strengthened by countless souls, she challenged the god of death and strove with him for the mastery of Pluton. Although she was mighty indeed, Nerul was an old and formidable god at this point, and even shorn of his dead legions, he was too strong. In order to defeat him, she had to release the souls she held. Each one freed gave up a tiny surge of strength as it passed from bondage. By freeing almost all the souls imprisoned in all of Pluton, she grew just strong enough to destroy Neril and seize his dominion over death. Of course, after this victory, the Sorcerer Queen thought to take Neril's place, just the next god of death in the cycle, mortal replacing god again. But this time, the other gods intervened. Rather than rising as the new deity of the dead, she instead presides over death itself. Mortal souls are no longer bound to eternal imprisonment, instead pass into the infinite, beyond the power or knowledge of the gods even. Ever since those events, the Death Goddess has sought to escape the strictures limiting her power. Soon after her ascension, she expunged her true name from the knowledge of all creatures and took to calling herself the Raven Queen. She abandoned Pluton and founded a realm of her own in the mountains of Latherna, in the Shadowfell. In the long centuries since the Raven Queen overthrew Neril, she has slowly increased her power, adding dominion over fate and winter to her rule over death. She sorely resents the gods who denied her the full power Neril once wielded, like the god before him, and she jealously guards her domain, one many other gods are also jealous of. She has no power over souls who do not bind themselves to gods or devils in life, but the Raven Queen claims all who place themselves in her power, and they are enslaved within her cold realm forever. One such group of these who bind themselves willingly to the Raven Queen are the Shadar Kai. Shadar Kai were once human, native to the world. They were all members of an extended tribe who called themselves Shadar Kai. These early humans had seen the abuses Neril, once god of death, perpetrated on the souls who passed into his power. They also feared the unknowable reaches of death into which most souls pass even now. When the Raven Queen slew Neril and ascended to godhood, in an age now largely forgotten, the Shadar Kai struck a deal with her. They promised to serve as her mortal agents. In exchange, she gave them incredibly long life and freedom from frailty. The Shadar Kai believed that, through their pact with her, they became the chosen people of death and winter. The Shadar Kai moved to the Shadowfell, setting up their communities on the border of Latherna. Life in shadow changed the humans, reshaping them and altering their appearance. Eventually, they were so different from humans that they became their own distinct species. As they expanded their territory in the Shadowfell and began interacting again with the mortal world, the tribal name became the name for their race. Through their pact with the Raven Queen, each Shadar Kai is an instrument of death and fate. The Raven Queen doesn't demand worship from the Shadar Kai, although she receives it in abundance. She demands only that they observe the pact by keeping her commandments, regardless of other beliefs. Most Shadar Kai hold no pity for the dying and try to punish those who defy fate. Shadar Kai also believe that nobody truly knows what fate holds. A Shadar Kai lives in extreme ways, not only to throw off the apathy of the Shadowfell, but also to test fate and ensure that he or she has a great destiny. All Shadar Kai hope for some sort of immortality, whether as a lasting legend, a sorrow-sworn servant of the Raven Queen, or something else entirely. The Raven Queen essentially rules over all of the Shadowfell, even though she takes up just a small part of it. All souls come to the Shadowfell, and sooner or later they pass through the Raven Queen's citadel in Latherna, except for the souls, those souled undead that evade the fate she decrees. Most creatures visit the Raven Queen only once, as formless souls after their mortal existence is concluded, though epic characters have a way of charting their own destinies. Many among the living worship the Raven Queen, hoping to gain some last reprieve from the god of fate when their final hour would otherwise be at hand. Makes sense that you would worship the god that decides your fate, though the cycle of the god of death has a much longer history than even what I've said today. This position has always had a way of changing hands. It is a majorly coveted position. To control all souls that die is a massive responsibility and a massive power. And even though the Raven Queen simply lets the souls pass through, she would do much more with them, like Neril, if the gods allowed her. And as such, many ploy for the position. Greatest of all, Orcus, who has amassed so much necromantic power that even in the face of the Raven Queen's prominence, many undead see the Demon Lord as their natural ruler, and one who will not so blithely dispense with them. However, although Orcus is less likely to annihilate undead out of some sense of natural balance between life and death, he is quick to sacrifice the ranks of his undead to achieve his ends. Many intelligent undead recognize this, so they avoid him. These undead also fear that if Orcus ever gains control of the Shadowfell, he might not stop there. Perhaps he would consolidate his control over death and the undead, and chain all undead to his will. Although the Raven Queen was a completely new character in D&D in 4th edition, she has persisted into 5th edition, keeping all titles, roles, and dominion over the Shadowfell, though she has changed. It is said that the Raven Queen is trapped by her fascination with the past. She sits in her fortress amidst all the memories of the world, looking at the ones that please her most, as though they were glittering jewels. Many great wizards have attempted to understand her motives, but like a raven, she has always remained cryptic, keeping her cache of secrets just out of reach. We also get some more conjecture about her real past and her mortal life. It is said that she was once an elf queen, whose people loved her more than they loved the gods. But from the fragments that have been found of her history, it was she who, when Corellon and Lolth were locked in conflict, tried to use the souls and magic of her people to elevate herself to godly status, thus salvaging the fractured pantheon of the elves. And it is said that she tried to make Corellon and Lolth come to their senses, but her true motives were never fully understood. But perhaps there is more to her story than a great mage dying and decided to take over Pluton as she passed through. 5th edition also offers an alternative to the Shadar-kai, for the Raven Queen and the Shadar-kai are one. To understand one, you have to understand the other. This story tells one much more closely associated with her own background when she was an elf, and her association with the elvish gods. It is said that the Shadar-kai were once elves, and they gathered around her in life, in hopes that once she achieved divinity, she would unify all the elves. The Queen's plan was to use the souls of the Shadar-kai to forge a path through the Feywild to Arvander, all the while increasing her influence. Though as the number of Shadar-kai grew, a consortium of evil wizards among her followers saw an opportunity to siphon off the energy of the Shadar-kai for themselves by performing their own self-serving ritual, which would impart to them magical powers beyond those of the greatest elven wizards of legend. But as the Queen approached the entrance to Arvander, she realized what these wizards were doing and brought all her wrath down upon them as the ritual was underway. At this point, she was a quasi-divine entity, and her supernatural rage corrupted the ritual into a phenomenon that took on a terrible strength of its own. By the time the Queen realized her error, she could feel the now twisted magical energy grabbing hold of her, and she was powerless to stop it. In a panic, she reached out to the souls of the Shadar-kai for more power, hoping to save herself. But the gravity of the spell had become irresistible. It pulled the Queen and all those who were underway into the Shadowfell, where she was instantly killed. From her ruined mind and body, the Raven Queen was born. Again, this is a completely alternate history to the one in 4th edition, the edition that spawned her. And while much of the Raven Queen's current activities, goals, and motivations are a mystery, her origin, or potential origins, paint two very different pictures of two very different beings. In the end, the goddess of death, winter, and fate is either an ambitious mortal, one who had planned, connived, and took over the god of death from within his own realm, and the other is just as ambitious, but more ambition that we would recognize as good. She was trying to unite all of her people and stop the gods from their petty squabbling. At the last moment, she had to intervene with some evil wizards, and with that mistake, she was tossed haphazardly into the Shadowfell, where she had to take up her mantle, along with the Shadar-kai following her there. Regardless, the Raven Queen will watch from her throne of ebony, feathers, and bone. She is and will remain the guardian of the threshold, the keeper of the veil between life and what lies beyond. Her dominion is not one of malice like her predecessors, but of balance, the final silence after life. This god of death is not a specter of doom, but instead the final confidant to whom all creatures, great and small, must one day whisper their final secrets to, as they await her decision to pass into the unknown.